Let us consider the following example. Let us consider the following example. In this, the processes are P1, P2 and P3 and their respective burst times are 24, 3, 3. Now let us consider the ready queue. In the ready queue, P1 is in the first and P2 is the second and P3 is the third. Now if the CPU executes the process P1, its waiting time is 0 because it starts at the initial and it executes until the burst time is completed, that is up to 24 milliseconds. After that, P2 comes to execution. For P2, the waiting time is 24 milliseconds. Now P2 executes 3 milliseconds, that means 27 milliseconds. The waiting time of P3 now became 27 milliseconds. Now P3 again executes 3 milliseconds, then total execution time for these three processes is 30 milliseconds. For example, if we consider average waiting time, then P1 waits plus P2 waits plus P3 waits divided by total number of processes. P1 waits for 0 milliseconds and P2 waits for 24 milliseconds and P3 waits for 27 milliseconds. That is 51 by 3, that equals to 17 milliseconds is average waiting time. In order to reduce the average waiting time, we have to sort the process based on their burst times. Now let us consider the sorted list. That is 3, 3 and 24. P2, P3 and P1. Now let us consider the new ready queue. In this, P2 executes first and then P3 and then P1. Now P2 waits for 0 milliseconds and it executes until its burst time, that is 3 milliseconds. Now P3 waits for only 3 milliseconds. Now P3 executes until its burst time, that is the total execution time until P3 execution is 6 milliseconds. So P1 waits for 6 milliseconds only. Now P1 executes 24 milliseconds, that is total execution time is 30 milliseconds. Here in both the processes the total execution time was same, but coming to average waiting time, P1 wait plus P2 wait plus P3 divided by total number of processes. P1 waits for 6 milliseconds, P2 waits for 0 milliseconds, P3 waits for 3 milliseconds divided by 3, that is 9 by 3, 3 milliseconds. Now the average waiting time is reduced from 17 milliseconds to 3 milliseconds.